everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
DanMachi, why am I being crowned the Lord of Cinder? Chapter 169 to 181. Chapter 169. First cooperation with the Loki Familia. 1176 words at the Loki Familia's residence. Reception hall. After successfully bringing Ron here, Tiona didn't forget to introduce him. Ron, this is our captain, Finn. You should know him already. We met in the dungeon before. The meeting setting was even more formal than Ron had expected. Not only was Finn, the captain of the Loki Familia, present, Riveria was here as well. Facing the two of them at once, both standing at the very peak of Aurario's strength. Ron, however, didn't feel much of anything. His tone was relaxed. Nice to see you again, Captain Finn, and Senior Riveria. A perfectly normal courtesy. Yet Finn couldn't feel happy at all. Looking at the composed young man who sat down on the single sofa without the slightest restraint, his expression was complicated. At this point, they had already handed all the initiative over to the guy in front of them. This time, we called you here. It's mainly about your Familia expedition. Even though it was the other party who needed help, even offering that help had to be done on their own initiative. The blonde boy felt stifled. He also knew if other Familias found out, their attitude would likely be even more eager, wishing that everything could go exactly as Ron wanted. Regarding the abnormal situation in the dungeon. If I'm not mistaken, including the dragon we encountered today on the 12th floor, and the floor boss that appeared on the first floor some time ago, the root cause. It should be related to the secret you carry, right? A very direct question. Since both sides already understood the situation, Ron didn't hide it. He gave a light nod, without offering any detailed explanation. That's right. You can rest assured we absolutely won't leak something like this. After receiving a clear answer, Riveria, her emerald green hair naturally cascading over her shoulders, possessing royal elven blood, and a beauty far colder than that of ordinary elves, lifted a strand of hair from her cheek, and tucked it behind her ear. It's not that we want to actively probe into your secret. It's just that anyone who has encountered you would probably come to the same conclusion. This time, calling you here, is mainly because of this matter. The secret you possess is beneficial to the vast majority of adventurers in Aurario higher intensity dungeon exploration. Whether it's the speed of ability growth, or the great feats required for level ascension. In other words, from the Loki Familia's standpoint, we hope most of all that your strength can develop rapidly. Ideally, we'd like to secure an opportunity for cooperative development. This was already an open negotiation. As for the opinions of the gods of their respective familias, they were no longer that important. Ron didn't feel any resistance to the idea. After all, given the current scale of his familia, even with the enhancement of the Souls-like dungeon, their overall strength development simply couldn't keep up with the worsening environment, especially once they reached the lower and deep floors, where smooth exploration would be impossible. Relying solely on the Hestia Familia was definitely not enough. There were only so many outstanding adventurers, only so many candidates who could be recruited or cultivated, and one also had to consider talent. As for cooperation, at the current stage, it's not something I can consider. From becoming an adventurer to reaching level 3, I've only just managed to touch the middle floors of the dungeon. The actual difficulty is hard to describe. To be honest, even the expedition target designated by the guild reaching the 24th floor, I think completing this expedition smoothly will already be extremely difficult. After all, it wouldn't be like before, where he could explore and return to Aurario the same day to have Hestia update his status. He would have to rely solely on his level 3 strength to push through the middle floors. All the prior conjectures had already been confirmed. Riveria didn't think Ron would overlook any key factors in a matter like this, but when she actually heard it, her heart was still shaken. Just relying on the upper floors, Ron had already grown to this extent. If he were placed in the more difficult middle floors, by the end of this expedition, he would at the very least reach level 4. We called you here because of this expedition. She didn't hide her thoughts. On her usually calm, iceberg-like face, a rare smile appeared. The Loki Familia has just finished an expedition. We currently have no plans for further exploration. If the overall difficulty is truly that high, then perhaps we can use this expedition to explore the possibility of future cooperation. Riveria emphasized, Familia expeditions can recruit supporters. These supporters were not like Lily, who assisted with logistics during exploration, but rather actual combat personnel from other Familias joining the expedition team. At this point, her emerald eyes looked at Ron, her tone firm, and as long as they've seen you, most members of the Loki Familia are very interested in the dungeon you're exploring. If you need assistance, they'd definitely be willing. This was exactly the answer Ron wanted. If he had taken the initiative to ask the Loki Familia for help, the favor he'd owe would likely place him in a passive position in future cooperation. Since things had reached this point, he smiled brightly, without the slightest politeness. Then I'll choose for myself. The moment she heard that, Riveria already had a bad premonition. But Ron's next words were completely beyond her expectations. The most suitable candidate would probably be Miss Lafia from your Familia. We're already acquaintances. As for the rest, do you have any suitable supporters? The expedition will last at least 10 days without supporters. Carrying enough supplies will be difficult. Riveria had thought Ron would make an outrageous demand, directly picking Tiona and her sister, or even Ace. But out of so many members, he only chose her disciple. Supporters who wouldn't affect the battle at all. Her eyes showed surprise. She tried to read something from the young man's face, and couldn't help but ask, "You're sure that's all you want?" Of course. If we brought Senior Riveria along, then this Familia expedition would have no meaning at all for the growth of the Hestia Familia members. What a joke. The goal of a Familia expedition wasn't just to earn the guild's reward, it was to allow Mikoto, Daphne, and the others to grow stronger. Including himself. Facing the surprised gazes of Finn and Riveria, Ron didn't avoid their eyes. His tone was casual. A Familia expedition is about setting a goal that's hard to reach, then putting in the effort. And in the end getting the reward that effort deserves, right? I've always believed that only becoming strong yourself is the true way to overcome all difficulties, not constantly relying on stronger people for help. Only then can you be considered a qualified adventurer, don't you think? I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 170, Chapter 170, Awin 1197 words, only one's own strength is the true way out of any predicament. When they heard Ron say this, the blonde youth, whose expression had been somewhat gloomy, couldn't hide the trace of surprise deep in his eyes as he exchanged a glance with Vice Captain Riveria. Without truly exploring it themselves, they had no way of imagining just how much trouble the dungeon's abnormal situation had brought Ron. All they could do was rely on today's encounter and that brief glimpse of the LV-4 ancient dragon Lanciax to form a rough impression. Even though there was clearly a faster way to proceed with the exploration right in front of him, Ron still chose to only have Lafia assist in the expedition. His reasoning wasn't hard to guess. He simply wanted to use the high-pressure environment of the dungeon to more thoroughly temper his ability values. That's really... Finn didn't know how to evaluate it. But looking straight into the calm eyes of the boy before him, perhaps it was precisely this kind of resolve, walking toward death to be reborn, that allowed his strength to grow so quickly. This was the kind of determination a hero seed needed. At the very least, if Finn were in Ron's position, he would absolutely choose the safer option. The overall risk was simply far too high. One misstep, and Lafia, the magic caster they had nurtured for so long as Riveria's successor, might very well be lost in the dungeon. Still, he didn't reject the proposal. More accurately, he had no right to reject it. If he missed this opportunity, there would be no chance of cooperating with Ron again in the future. Besides, Finn strongly suspected that even if he refused, Ron, the guy who could stab himself without hesitation when facing an ancient dragon floor boss he could hardly defeat, someone who would gamble his life against life, wouldn't change his mind. Don't have any objections. I think Lafia won't refuse this expedition either. As one of the core members we've trained, her safety is something you should understand. You know exactly what I mean. At this point, the blonde youth offered a compromise. How about letting Tiona and Tioni accompany you on the expedition? They're both LV 5 adventurers. As long as you're not facing a life-or-death crisis, they won't interfere with your exploration. You can treat them as a kind of safety guarantee. And there was an unexpected bonus. The adventurers Finn mentioned were basically the same ones who had fought during the subjugation of the ancient dragon Lanciax. Their strength was beyond question. As a final safeguard, they could also go all out in battle without hesitation when facing those mutated special monsters. Ron didn't agree immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the distance, where a dark-skinned, tomboyish Tiona leaning against the wall and completely giving up on thinking stood. When their eyes met, he could even see the anticipation in the girl's deep brown eyes. No problem. Decisive as always. Without any bargaining, he allowed the Hiryut sisters to join the expedition team, which would also give them a more direct understanding of the dungeon's abnormal developments. And then Finn heard his follow-up condition. However, for this expedition, I hope the Loki Familia can provide some support in terms of supplies. Captain Finn, you know how it is. The Hestia Familia hasn't been established for long. Our conditions are really quite poor. We can probably only guarantee basic food, clothing, and shelter. As for everything else, it's honestly hard to provide. The blonde youth decided to take back his earlier evaluation. While loosening the restrictions on expedition members, this guy didn't forget to make demands. As for the claim that the Hestia Familia had poor conditions, Finn couldn't help but twitch at the corner of his mouth. After inheriting all of Apollo Familia's assets and liquid funds, and with so few members saying something like that was absurd. More importantly, after that gambling event hosted by the goddess Hephaestus, which bankrupted countless gods if Ron hadn't been involved, Finn absolutely didn't believe it. He had already made concessions. If he maintained a hard stance now, it might cause their first cooperation to fall apart. Finn felt like he had swallowed a fly, utterly disgusted. If you need anything, just say it. I won't stand on ceremony. And also about the great sacred tree branch, I hope Lady Riveria can get it done as soon as possible. A full harvest. At least, that was how Ron saw it. Not only had he secured powerful fire support like Lafia for the upcoming Familia expedition, but also the Hiryut sisters, 2 LV 5 adventurers, as safety guarantees, and part of the expedition costs would be shared by the Loki Familia. A win-win. Which, of course, meant he kept winning. Then I won't disturb you any further, Captain Finn. There's still a lot I need to coordinate carefully for this dungeon expedition. Watching the black-haired boy's departing figure, Finn collapsed onto the sofa, feeling utterly drained. This was, in a real sense, his first proper interaction with Ron. Troublesome. But the reason was clear: this guy understood the uniqueness of his own talent. After all, supply and demand were plainly laid out. Even without the Loki Familia, Ron could still develop in the dungeon. But without Ron, if they wanted to pursue a broader future, it would be extremely difficult for them. Forget it. At least he's relatively easy to communicate with. He didn't ask for outrageous terms. And negotiations are always like this: you make a demand. He adjusts the conditions. As someone directly involved, Riveria smiled lightly. After truly interacting with him, Ron had actually left a very good impression on her. She didn't feel any arrogance from him. An extremely steady personality, clear-minded, and calm in judgment. If he were someone who could be easily fooled into cooperation, then with Ron's talent, perhaps, it would be the Loki Familia who would have a headache in future dungeon explorations. After all, just the fact that he could trigger the dungeon's abnormal situation, the later this was exposed to Aura Rio, the more of an advantage he could seize. He had come to terms with it. Finn naturally had his pride. After all, he carried the burden of restoring the glory of the Paolum race, and that responsibility forced him to judge things calmly. As he carefully reflected, the most direct impression was the sense of contradiction surrounding Ron. In dungeon exploration, he was willing to take extremely high risks. But in other aspects, he possessed a level of caution that people his age absolutely didn't have. This guy. Can he really become a hero? The blonde youth couldn't help but murmur. The failure of the Hera and Zeus Familius had already proven that that path could never reach the end. A seed with the potential of a hero, how exactly one becomes a hero? No one knew the answer. Meanwhile, the green-haired elf of royal lineage, her gaze deep, gently shook her head and sighed. Perhaps the path he's chosen was never about becoming a hero in the first place. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 171, Chapter 171, An Excited Lafia 1247 words. At the Hearth Mansion. According to the explanation given by the prom girl at the flower shop, occasionally watering the bouquet with a spray bottle could somewhat prolong the blooming period of the flowers. Naturally, Hestia did exactly that. Even though the Familia's finances now meant that filling the entire garden with Cecilia flowers wouldn't be a problem at all, she still chose to do it this way. The reason was simple. She wanted Ron to understand her feelings. And so watching Ron return to the Familia residence close to midnight, the black-haired girl raised her head in surprise, immediately noticing the smile on his face. "You're back. Did something good happen?" At the very least, the upcoming Familia expedition will definitely go smoothly. Ron didn't mention his negotiations with Finn of the Loki Familia. His gaze fell on the watering can in Hestia's hand. And the pure white bouquet she was tending to. It looked unfamiliar, at least, he had never seen it before coming to this world. Its appearance resembled an orchid. It was probably a native flower of Ora Rio. Since when did his goddess have a hobby like flower arranging? Ron really didn't know. But thinking about it, it made sense. Before, she had to worry about rent and daily expenses, working at the weapon shop every day. Even though that was still the case now, having a hobby in her spare time was always a good thing. It was certainly better than going back to that shut-in lifestyle she had in the heavens. That's good. She didn't ask further. Mainly because Ron had his own considerations. What Hestia wanted wasn't much, just that he could safely return from every dungeon exploration. She didn't continue the topic. Instead, she shifted her gaze to the Cecilia flowers arranged in a glass bottle and asked tentatively, "Ron, what do you think of this bouquet? It looks nice." And then, Cecilia flowers. Their floral language represented the true feelings of a wandering heart. With more and more women appearing around Ron lately, Hestia had a strong premonition that he was heading in the direction of becoming exactly that. The girl looked at him expectantly. "This should be an orchid, right? I've never seen this kind before." The moment Ron identified the bouquet as an orchid, she was completely drained. All the words Hestia had prepared got stuck in her throat, as if lodged there. Was she just playing a lute to a cow? Her smile stiffened. "Then let's just say it's an orchid. Loki Familia." Inside a two-person dorm room, a girl with short, slightly curly brown hair tied into a small braid near her earlobe watched her roommate busily working, her eyes filled with confusion. This was Elfie Colette. The celebration banquet had just ended tonight. Logically speaking, during the following period, all members of the Loki Familia should have a short, relatively free vacation. And yet she saw Lafia organizing her equipment and armor. Given her lively personality and the fact they were roommates, the girl immediately asked, "Lafia, the Familia expedition just ended, so why are you organizing your gear again? Don't tell me something happened in the Elven Forest and you need to go back. It can't be that you're slacking off on training just because it's a break." After receiving the notice that over the next half-month, she would be joining the Hestia Familia's dungeon expedition as a supporter, Lafia was naturally excited. Before meeting Ron, she had never even heard his name in Ora Rio. But after returning from the expedition and learning about the feats he had accomplished during this period, it was hard not to feel shocked. But even more than that, after witnessing it firsthand, and learning that the source of the abnormal situation in the dungeon was Ron, a deep curiosity welled up within her. Just what kind of difficulty could lead to that kind of growth? Lafia desperately wanted an answer. But the stance of the Familia was there. Even if she was curious, she couldn't act on it. Yet when she received a clear notification from her master, Riveria the elven girl didn't hesitate at all. She decisively chose to accept. Even though she had just finished a dungeon expedition not long ago and was about to head into an even more intense one. Perhaps the difficulty would be extremely high. She might even encounter the ancient dragon Lanciax again, the one she had faced on the 12th floor. But precisely because she understood the danger, Lafia accepted so decisively. A rookie adventurer had caught up to her in just over a month. If she didn't work harder, she would definitely be left behind. Fatigue was inevitable. After enduring a month-long Familia expedition under the high-pressure environment of the deep floors, but that fatigue couldn't extinguish her drive. Instead, her curiosity about the dungeon's abnormal situation and about Ron reached its peak. Perhaps this was a chance. A chance to truly understand him. I want to push myself. It's not about chasing after some senior. I just don't want to be left behind by a friend. Hey. You working this hard makes me feel ashamed. Elfie dragged out her tone, more teasing than anything else. To be precise, after graduating from the school district and undergoing the kind of Spartan training Lafia had received, this behavior didn't surprise her at all. She understood and respected it. The brown-haired girl also wanted to grow stronger, but she knew she could never push herself to that extent. It's not like that. Hearing the teasing from her roommate and close friend, yet thinking about the dungeon's abnormal situation, and her curiosity about Ron, Lafia's cheeks flushed slightly, feeling a bit embarrassed. She recalled her earlier conversation with Riveria. Only she would truly participate in combat. The two seniors traveling with her, like Tiona, were only there to ensure safety. As for the choice of supporter, it hadn't been finalized yet. At that thought, Lafia turned her gaze toward her friend Elfie. As a member of the 2nd Expeditionary Unit, she was also a Level 2 adventurer. In past expeditions, her role had been combat support. Joining this expedition might be a good choice. After all, this expedition would last around half a month without a supporter. It simply wouldn't work. More importantly, her talent was recognized by everyone. If there was any issue, it was probably her resistance to harsh training. But perhaps once she realized the danger of the dungeon's abnormal situation, she would find her motivation. Most importantly, Elfie could improve the team atmosphere. Her lively personality was undeniable. She could do many things that Lafia couldn't, like acting as the unique emotional link within the team. Lafia really wasn't good at interpersonal communication. Perfect plan. The light in the elven girl's azure eyes grew brighter and brighter. Since her master Riveria had entrusted her with choosing the supporter, then a slight smile curved her lips. There's something else. Elfie, you two start preparing for dungeon exploration. This time, we'll probably be unable to return to Rio for half a month. As for the specific mission, it's to join the Hestia Familia's expedition as a supporter. I'm going to. Lafia's smile turned a bit sly, then she gave a reason Elfie couldn't refuse, of course. This is also Master Riveria's decision. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 172, Chapter 172, Final Preparations, the girls all to 1143 words, as you instructed. I've already purchased all the necessary supplies, enough to cover about 10 days of daily consumption for 8 people in the dungeon. If that's not enough, we'll have to buy more at Riviera, on the 18th floor. For the Hestia Familia's first true dungeon expedition, Daphne naturally threw herself into the task with full focus, handling every aspect of logistics and coordination. Perhaps, in terms of ability, values and talent, she really couldn't compare to a monster like Ron. But not every Familia member needed to be a combatant. Especially during a dungeon expedition, stable logistical support was just as indispensable. Looking at the boy in front of her, as for why so many daily supplies were being prepared, it was probably because their captain had found some kind of outside support. Which was a good thing. They hadn't even truly encountered mutated monsters yet, but just from that powerful dragon-type creature alone, it was already clear how high the overall difficulty would be. Ron was indeed strong. But if he had to carry the entire Familia forward by himself, just thinking about it made it seem incredibly difficult. Thanks for the hard work. This was probably the meaning behind a Familia's existence. Not everything had to be handled personally, he just needed to coordinate things well, especially the tedious internal affairs and logistics. As for combat, Ron had absolutely no issues. No matter how strong the monsters in the dungeon were, at worst, it was just a matter of how many times he'd die. And after the war game, they hadn't truly begun exploring yet. With the Hestia Familia's current lineup, he did need to proceed cautiously. First, scout the floor conditions. But with support from the Loki Familia 2 level 5 adventurers like the Hiryut sisters backing them up, there was no need for that many concerns. Ron's gaze swept over Daphne. After a moment, it landed on the gloomy girl standing behind her, looking timid. He spoke casually, "Plans have changed. We're departing tomorrow. Just treat it like a normal dungeon exploration. Don't put too much pressure on yourselves." Daphne didn't respond. But the corner of her eye twitched uncontrollably. Maybe only someone like Ron, a captain, who had been tempered by those abnormal situations, had the right to say something like that so lightly. Nervousness was unavoidable. But more than that, she felt anticipation. The path of an adventurer was about constantly climbing higher. Who wouldn't want to see the view from above? "I'm talking to you." After Ron left, Daphne reached out and tugged at her friend's cheek, speaking helplessly, "Don't put so much pressure on yourself. Otherwise you'll start having those weird dreams again." Behind her, Cassandra lowered her head, her blue hair covering her face, her expression filled with an indescribable unease. Watching Ron's departing figure, she finally lifted her head. Her vague, elusive prophetic dreams had already been proven true on the 12th floor. Back when she was in the Apollo Familia, even when her prophecies came true, other factors would still cause her companions, especially Daphne, to doubt the results. She couldn't be sure whether Ron would end up the same. Facing her friend's helpless gaze, Cassandra unusually didn't nod this time. "The captain said that if I have dreams like this again, I can tell him. Have you considered that he might have just been comforting you?" Daphne waved her hand dismissively, noticing the darkening sky outside and thinking about tomorrow's expedition. "Get some rest early." Back in her room, since the Hestia Familia had so few members, she didn't have to share a dorm with others. Cassandra didn't have as much psychological pressure. She didn't have to worry about waking up from nightmares and disturbing her companions. Surely Ron will believe me. Even though she hadn't gone to sleep yet, with such a difficult expedition approaching, she still had a strong premonition. One that left her deeply unsettled. But once she lay down, the moment her head touched that familiar pillow, she quickly drifted into sleep. It was as if time slowed down, yet her consciousness remained unusually clear. That familiar feeling made her slowly open her eyes. Deep darkness surged like something almost tangible, as if trying to swallow Cassandra whole, making it hard to even breathe. But her body couldn't respond at all, she could only drift along with it. Until a towering blaze gradually drove away the darkness. Even her own body began to burn away within that fire. And just as her instincts forced her consciousness to awaken, Cassandra finally saw the source. A furnace that seemed capable of incinerating everything. And a massive giant, continuously feeding fuel into its flames. The girl shot upright from her bed. In that brief dream, her nightclothes had been completely soaked with sweat. The sensation of being on the brink of death lingered in her chest. Strangely, It wasn't fear. But when facing that giant, she could clearly feel it, that unmistakable taste of death. It can't be real too, right? From her past dungeon experience, at least in her understanding, the dungeon definitely didn't contain anything like the monster she saw in that dream. As for why, it was probably because of Captain Ron's unusual nature. This had to be told to him. But now clearly wasn't the time. As the team's healer, she knew she had to maintain her condition during the expedition. She had to rest. But every time Cassandra closed her eyes, she saw that terrifying, never-before-seen monster. As expected, she couldn't sleep. "We're ready. It's just, are you really not considering buying some emergency panaceas?" Looking at Daphne and Mikoto in full gear, even though they hadn't entered the dungeon yet, anticipation was already visible in their eyes. That was good news. What Ron feared most was that after experiencing the Souls-like difficulty, they would become afraid of those hellish monsters and lose the will to move forward. Facing Daphne's question, he smiled and shook his head. "More accurately, someone will prepare them for us." Even though he hadn't said it directly to Finn of the Loki Familia, he had already hinted at their poor conditions. There was no way they wouldn't offer some form of support. However, Ron scanned the surroundings. When he didn't see Cassandra anywhere, he frowned slightly and was about to ask Daphne when he saw the gloomy girl walking into the meeting hall, heavy dark circles under her eyes. "Cassandra. You're here." Afraid her poor condition would be noticed by the captain, Cassandra lowered her head even further and answered in a muffled voice, "Captain Ron, there's something I want to tell you. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 173, Chapter 173, Setting Out for the Expedition. 12:20 For words still sleeping in, Elfie gradually woke up under Lafia's shaking. When she looked at the elf already fully geared up, her eyes were filled with confusion. She had originally thought Lafia was just joking with her, and hadn't taken it seriously at all. But this was real. "Do I really have to go?" Hey. We just finished a dungeon expedition. At most we've only rested for 1 day. Even slaves aren't worked this hard, right? Don't worry. As for combat, you don't need to think about it." Though it was another seamless transition, the elf girl's face showed not the slightest trace of fatigue. Looking toward Tiona waiting outside the dorm door, she emphasized once more, "This expedition. You just need to fulfill the role of a supporter. Trust me, even as a supporter, what you gain will exceed your imagination. To come into contact with the essence of the dungeon. Hurry up. Don't keep Senior Tiona waiting. I also need to introduce you to a friend." After dragging her roommate out of bed with some difficulty, Lafia finally let out a breath of relief once Elfie started washing up. There was definitely enough time, but since this was their first time exploring together as a team, they had to arrive early. At the very least, they needed to leave a good impression on Ron's companions. Don't supporters come in plenty? During a normal holiday, not to mention going into the dungeon, Elfie wouldn't even want to think about daily training. But since this was arranged by the vice captain, even if she was unwilling, she could only obey the Familia's orders. However, when she heard the latter half of Lafia's words that she would be introducing her to a new friend, Elfie's gossip-loving heart finally sparked with some interest. "A friend? Lafia, you actually have other friends besides me? What are you saying?" Even if it was true, hearing Elfie say it out loud still made Lafia a bit embarrassed. After all, she hadn't been in the Familia for long. She couldn't really be called a fringe member. But the others were mostly her seniors. The only ones she could communicate with normally were Elfie and... She explained, "It's a friend I met while exploring the dungeon. This time, for the Familia expedition, we're going to assist him. Your friend's Familia needs to go on an expedition, and I have to go too, is that it?" This kind of thing wasn't uncommon. If they weren't heading to particularly deep regions, members of the Hephaestus Familia would also follow the second expeditionary force into the dungeon for training. But when Lefia's friend and Familia expedition were combined, the amount of information contained in that statement became enormous. Elfie frowned slightly, her gaze falling on Tiona standing at the dorm entrance. Even senior Tiona was participating. Though it wasn't explicitly forbidden, minimizing contact with other familias was considered common sense among adventurers unless the familias had particularly close relations. And the key point: the familias that were on good terms with Loki familia were only those few. No matter how you looked at it, there was no need for someone like her to be involved in expedition assistance. Yet this time not only was Lefia participating, even a first-tier adventurer from their familia was accompanying them. That made the whole matter extremely intriguing. Hurry and tell me. Who exactly is it? Looking at Elfie, who was already prepared, and since both Tiona and Tioni had already met Ron, Lefia didn't hide it. However, when she thought of Ron's familiar face, the corners of her lips couldn't help but curl upward. You definitely know him. At the mention of the name Ron, how could Elfie not be familiar with it? Having just returned to Rio after finishing their expedition, she had inquired about recent events, and 3 major happenings were all related to that guy. A rookie adventurer breaking Ace's record, becoming level 3 in the shortest time, and even sweeping aside that annoying Apollo familia. An adventurer whose talent was comparable to a monster still needed assistance from other familias for an expedition. It wasn't that she doubted Lefia. She tugged at the corner of her mouth slightly. Are you sure this guy needs our help for a dungeon expedition? It might sound absurd to you, but that's just how it is. Instead of directly explaining that the dungeon's abnormal state was caused by Ron's own talent drawing hatred, it would be more convincing to let Elfie experience it herself. Facing her close friend's curiosity, Lefia chose to play mysterious. With a relaxed smile, she said, "It's hard to explain the exact reason, but once you join this expedition, you'll probably understand." After finishing preparations for the dungeon expedition, the elf girl looked toward the 2 senior members of her familia waiting quietly in the dorm corridor. She nodded seriously. Senior Tiona. We're ready. Next, let's head to the dungeon. We'll meet up with Ron at the starting path. Tiona held her twin great blades. As for consecutive expeditions, she had no complaints. After all, there were plenty of people in the familia who wanted this slot, like Ace, who had come looking for her last night. To truly experience the harsh environment of the dungeon after coming into contact with that abnormal state. The only downside was before Ron or Lefia faced life-threatening danger, she couldn't intervene. Let's go. Daphne's logistical and coordination abilities were precisely what the Hestia familia lacked. As for Cassandra, standing before them, even if her healing skills were average and she couldn't contribute much in combat if Ron had to weigh it, the latter was far more important. Just the fact that she could foresee possible futures through her dreams, no matter what, Hestia familia would always have a place for her. Under the negative influence of Cassandra's prophetic dreams, she wasn't trusted by others. But as a transmigrator, Ron could ignore that effect. Looking at the timid girl standing before him, his attitude was relaxed as he casually asked, "Go on. Did you have another bad dream last night?" Faced with the question, the girl nodded lightly. But just as she was about to explain honestly, Cassandra instead asked, "Captain Ron, do you believe me?" Of course. Being distrusted for so long and even being treated as strange because of her dreams would inevitably leave some psychological scars on Cassandra. What Ron needed to do was simple. He nodded frankly. "Didn't we already encounter your dream on the 12th floor? Since it concerns the safety of our familia members, no matter what the truth is, I think we should prepare for the worst. And besides, before you met me, could you have imagined that an ordinary adventurer could trigger an abnormal state in the dungeon?" The girl shook her head repeatedly. Feeling the trust from Ron, this very trust was constantly erasing the fear that dream had left in her heart. When she raised her head again, her gaze gradually became firm. A giant adding firewood beside a furnace. Flames that burned us completely to ashes. It was exaggerated. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/Tito Viller. Chapter 174, Chapter 174, Just Empty Reputation. 1211 Words Giants, Furnaces, Flames. When all these fragmented pieces of information from Cassandra came together in Ron's mind, the imagery suddenly became strikingly vivid. It was practically triggering the burn the tree keyword. The problem was there was no Erd tree in the world of DanMachi for him to burn. I understand. A mere fire giant. As long as he could run into that thing, Ron was confident he could die to it. And when it came to a floor boss that fit the dungeon Souls-like transformation, one candidate immediately came to mind. Goliath on the 17th floor. Was this the formidable enemy their expedition would have to face next? Without outside support from the Loki Familia, relying solely on the current Hestia Familia would make this an exceptionally troublesome challenge. But with 2 5 adventurers backing them up looking at the gloomy girl whose expression had darkened, Ron nodded seriously. Don't worry. For this expedition, we have 2 senior adventurers accompanying us. No matter what. I won't allow that kind of situation to happen. When facing the ancient dragon Lanciax, Ron had not broken his promise. He had turned the situation around with unimaginable strength. And now, having received another assurance from their captain, and with the long-suppressed dream in her mind finally finding an outlet, the worry lingering in Cassandra's brows gradually faded. There was no blame. Only unconditional trust. Even though she hadn't been part of the Hestia Familia for long, the girl seemed to have found that sense of belonging, one where members shared both honor and disgrace together. I believe in you. Cassandra's prophetic dream did not disrupt the expedition's progress. And after learning that they would be facing a fire giant to be precise, Ron was filled with anticipation. The prayers he had gained from slaying the ancient dragon had already brought a comprehensive boost to his current strength. Facing another Souls-like boss again, it was hard not to look forward to the rewards. Let's move. A Familia expedition could receive assistance from other Familias. But Ron had no intention of making it too obvious. After all, they were only heading to the 24th floor. Judging by normal difficulty standards, the Hestia Familia didn't need it at all. Yet the Loki Familia had still gone to great lengths to dispatch so many high-level adventurers to assist something that would easily arouse suspicion from guild members. The best option was naturally to rendezvous at the starting floors of the dungeon. After passing identity verification at the entrance with the Ganesha Familia guards, Ron led his companions down the spiral staircase into the open floor below. Waiting there in advance were members of the Loki Familia. Especially Lafia. The moment she saw Ron fully armed, carrying a great sword, and a brass-heavy shield, she waved enthusiastically. We're over here. Good morning. After a simple greeting with the golden-haired elf, Ron's gaze shifted to the pair of dark-skinned Amazon sisters, Tiona and Tioni. After all, they were offering assistance for free. With a warm tone, he took the initiative. For this expedition, we'll be relying on you 2 seniors. I'm glad to be traveling together with you. That's what we were going to say too. Compared to Tiona, the dark-skinned girl beside her had a noticeably more impressive figure. Her smile was composed, and her eyes were filled with curiosity. After all, when Captain Finn mentioned Ron, he had worn a troubled expression, something even more severe than when Ace used to cause trouble years ago. However, when her eyes landed on Ron's equipment, the corner of her mouth couldn't help but twitch. Compared to this boy, who clearly carried many secrets, Tioni herself only brought 2 curved blades that could double as throwing weapons. He must have his own reasons for doing things this way. Her gaze swept past Ron and the several girls behind him, who were standing on guard, before she got to the point. About the supplies you mentioned. Captain Finn allocated 10 all-healing elixirs. That should be enough for this expedition. Before you encounter life-threatening danger, Tiona and I won't step in. Please thank Captain Finn for me. Each bottle of all-healing elixir cost 500,000 Valis. Ron hadn't expected such a generous contribution. In other words, it also proved just how important Lafia was. There was no need for introductions. In Orario, it was rare to find adventurers who didn't recognize members of the Loki familia. However, when Ron's gaze landed on a brown-haired girl, he felt a bit unfamiliar. No impression at all. But thanks to her lively personality, Elfie didn't need Lafia to introduce her. Her bright eyes were filled with curiosity as she stepped forward and extended her hand. "You can call me Elfie. I'm Lafia's roommate and also a support member for this expedition. Please take care of me." "Of course. We're comrades fighting side by side. Helping each other is only natural." Ron nodded lightly. Hearing that she was Lafia's roommate, he didn't find it strange. Since Lafia had been specifically requested to join the expedition, it made sense for her roommate to be brought along as well. As for anything else that needed to be arranged, the Loki familia would definitely handle it. "By the way, Ron, I'll just call you that." With her naturally friendly personality, and since Ron looked about the same age, Elfie had no trouble talking to him. In other words, she was extremely curious about the adventurer who had broken Ace's record and created so many miracles in Orario. Tilting her head, she asked, "I want to ask, are we heading to the lower floors for this expedition?" "Why do you ask?" "If we're not going to the lower floors, then with your familia, wouldn't it be easy to reach the expedition's destination?" Her tone was matter of fact. For Tiona and Tioni to be involved, the expedition floor should at least be within the lower floors. As for the specific reason, perhaps it was some kind of deal made with Captain Finn. It wasn't exactly a rigid assumption. In the eyes of most adventurers, this was simply normal. The problem was Ron's dungeon was anything but normal. Facing Elfie's direct gaze, he rubbed his nose and nodded. "This expedition's objective is the 24th floor of the middle floors." After hearing the exact answer, Elfie hesitated to speak. The curiosity in her eyes gradually faded. If they were truly just LV3 adventurers, then why would such a simple expedition require assistance from another familia? So perhaps the rumors in Orario were never that impressive to begin with, only exaggerated through repeated retellings. Of course, she wouldn't say something so tactless out loud. But the suspicions that had always existed in the depths of her heart were now gradually being confirmed. How could there really be an adventurer who could break through repeatedly in such a short time and reach LV? Watching the expedition team move forward after finally meeting Ron, the so-called miracle-making adventurer of Orario, Elfie found that after a brief conversation, he felt somewhat ordinary. At that thought, her mood immediately worsened. "So boring. Feels like I wasted my precious vacation." I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 175, Chapter 175. The Confused Girl, Philvis is taking action. 1107 words. How should this familia expedition be described? Very simple. At least, that's how Elfie, the supporter, saw it. Carrying a massive supply backpack on her back, she walked at the very rear of the expedition team. The monsters they encountered along the way were nothing more than goblins and imps, the kind she normally couldn't even be bothered to deal with. Just low-tier trash mobs. The good news was, they were only heading to the middle floors, floor 24. At their current pace, it wouldn't take long. They'd probably be back in Orario to rest soon. Let's just treat it as a dungeon picnic. That was the only way the girl could comfort herself. Her vacation had vanished for no reason at all, and she didn't even feel like chatting with Lafia. She passed through floors she had already visited countless times, utterly bored. Until the expedition reached the end of floor 12 and stopped before the staircase leading to what was known as the first death line, the entrance to the middle floors. Elfie looked up and saw that Ron, the captain of this expedition, wore an expression more serious than ever before, as if he were about to face an especially troublesome monster. "Everyone. The next floors are considerably more dangerous. Ron had personally experienced the oppressive presence brought by the giant dog. For Lafia, Daphne, and the others who had never dealt with souls-like monsters, it was necessary to issue a safety warning. He glanced around at everyone and calmly explained, "These monsters. I ran into them while scouting ahead. They're quite troublesome." The Adventurers Guild had records of nearly all monsters. For Lafia, who had already reached LV3, she had traveled to and from the middle floors more times than she could count. She might not know everything perfectly, but she definitely knew how to deal with most situations. But Ron's emphasis made her realize something was different. An abnormal situation. The elven girl raised her head, eyes filled with surprise. Could his unique ability be causing changes in the dungeon's monsters? She didn't ignore the warning, "I'll be careful. And as an adventurer, no matter what kind of monster we encounter, staying on guard is always the right choice." The reminder was brief. Fortunately, many of the adventurers present had already experienced the ancient dragon Lanciax, which saved Ron the trouble of giving a detailed explanation. And from yesterday evening after their battle with the giant dog pack, they had concluded that frequently using incantations against these T-Rex-like monsters consumed an enormous amount of mental energy. Real combat enjoyment. That, of course, came from using the great sword, Great Fortune, to crush everything head-on. He took the heavy weapon off his back, nodded toward the Hiryut sisters, and decisively stepped forward into the next floor. "Is this really necessary?" At the rear of the expedition, Elfie shook her head lightly and quickened her pace to keep up. But as she walked beside Tioni and looked at Ron's retreating figure, she finally couldn't hold back her confusion. She raised her head, her slightly chubby face filled with helplessness. "Senior Tioni, this is just a middle-floor expedition. Is all this really necessary?" Of course it was necessary. Rather than ensuring the team's safety, Tioni, who had a steady and composed approach, clearly understood the true purpose she and her sister had. To observe, evaluate, and determine the possibility of future cooperation with Ron. That kind of thing. Naturally, she wouldn't tell Elfie. She could clearly sense the faint resentment in the girl's tone, probably because her vacation had been taken away. Thinking of that, Tioni shook her head and warned, "From here on, anything you encounter in the dungeon, you are not allowed to disclose it to your familia members or any other friends. Remember that. Otherwise, Captain Finn will come looking for you. Isn't this just a normal expedition? If it were, why do you think we're here? You should be thanking Lafia for even being allowed to come. You just need to understand. Even Ace wanted to join this expedition as a supporter. To prevent Elfie from doing something stupid." Tioni smiled kindly, but beneath that kindness was an undisguised disdain toward the girl. She couldn't even figure out something this important. It was, at least, advice from a senior. But the sheer weight of information made Elfie realize the seriousness of the situation. Looking at the figures ahead gradually pulling away, she quickened her pace. So what exactly did Tioni mean? Why did even Ace want to join this expedition? Countless questions clouded the girl's mind. Elfie walked down the dim staircase. And when she finally reached the middle floors, the place known as the First Death Line, she understood. In the darkness ahead, countless red, ferocious eyes flickered, monsters seemingly gathered just to welcome the expedition. The moment she arrived, a suffocating pressure crashed down on her. Is this a monster feast? But before she could even confirm it, when she saw the creature stepping out of the darkness, her shocked expression slowly turned blank. Hellhound. This was a completely unknown monster. At least in size, it rivaled the minotaur found on deeper floors. Gray-brown skin, covered in sparse fur. As if scorched by flames. But what truly horrified Elfie was its indescribable form. Something like a dinosaur. A massive, grotesque canine head, its cold fangs seemingly capable of tearing anything apart. Powerful hind legs contrasted sharply with its hunched forelimbs. An utterly distorted body ratio. Just looking at it made one's skin crawl. Facing those blood-red eyes filled with killing intent even as a LV-2 adventurer, Elfie felt overwhelming pressure. Were normal hellhounds like this? Absolutely not. And now all the questions that had been troubling her finally had answers. It wasn't that Ron was all talk. It was that his dungeon exploration was completely different from what she had experienced. Antione's earlier warning. But before Elfie could fully process her existential crisis at the very front of the team, that figure wielding the massive greatsword Ron had already charged straight at the giant dogs. Are you serious? What the hell is going on? At the same time, having received orders from the god Dionysus, and upon learning that the entire Hestia Familia had entered the dungeon, Chalia did not hesitate. She took another exit from Deadless Street and headed deeper into the dungeon. Her target Ron. No matter the cost, she would bring the core executor of the madness plan before her god. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 176, Chapter 176, on the power of character save slot combinations. 1137 words, now I see. These monsters really are a bit outrageous. Having followed a Familia expedition into the lower floors before, Lafia had even seen entirely new types of special monsters that adventurers had never recorded. But on her first encounter, she had never felt anything as strange as when facing these giant dogs. If she had to point out the difference, it was probably that those monsters weren't quite as strong. And she had already formed a judgment. The elven girl knew that the real reason these giant dogs had gathered here ultimately came down to the secret that Ron possessed. The atmosphere grew extremely tense. Up ahead, in the distance, an enormous number of monsters lurked in the darkness, evident just from the densely packed crimson eyes. What should we do? This was, in a real sense, her first time teaming up with Ron. With no experience fighting these special monsters, Lafia's first instinct was to seek the captain's judgment. She looked forward. Just as she was about to speak, she saw that Ron, walking at the very front of the group, had already gripped his greatsword with both hands and charged straight toward the gathering swarm of special monsters. Right behind him followed the rather quiet Mikoto. No tactical arrangement whatsoever. This was completely different from the dungeon expeditions Lafia had experienced before. This was just going head-on, wrestling with monsters. Only the victor gets to live. Seeing this, the elven girl couldn't help but feel a strange, indescribable emotion. This kind of exploration. Isn't it a bit too reckless? No one could give her an answer. When they first arrived at this floor yesterday, because Ron wanted to move quickly back and forth to Rio, he hadn't brought much equipment. When using incantations to fight, he had been swarmed by a massive pack of giant dogs, leaving him somewhat battered. Now he was here in the dungeon to get his payback. When you play as a devout incantation caster and run into giant dogs that can close the distance fast, breathe fire, and tank hits, fine, I won't argue with you. I'll just leave the dungeon. But now, as a proud warrior returning to the dungeon once more, what should you call me? Quite a lot of them. Ron understood perfectly. Ever since becoming an adventurer, the dungeon's intent had been crystal clear: it would stop at nothing to kill him. Not that he was rebelling. He just wanted to experience that thrill of domination. Since that so-called useless husband of the Black Dragon hadn't shown up yet, then the dungeon was like a wife left alone at home. The stronger the resistance, the greater the satisfaction of conquering it. He had to dive deep, push forward relentlessly, and wrestle with that unwilling wife until she was completely reshaped by his will. There was no battle plan. Mainly because there was no need. With 2 level 5 adventurers holding the line, plus 10 panaceas sponsored by Finn, there was no need to worry about the safety of the Familia members. Fighting individually only in this high-pressure, Souls-like dungeon environment could they directly sharpen their ability values and combat skills. Let me test their quality first. Fully prepared for battle, Ron could feel the burning fighting spirit within him. At the same time, the surge of adrenaline kept his mind razor-sharp. Gripping the greatsword with both hands, He stared at the giant dog charging at him, its grotesque maw wide open, fangs gleaming coldly, as if they could tear apart any living thing. Because of its bizarre proportions, the monster's running posture looked extremely awkward. Its center of gravity leaned heavily forward, exposing a massive opening. Ron's leg muscles exploded with force. The nearly 20-meter distance vanished within a single breath. Carrying great fortune, he surged forward, quickly adjusting his stance. He raised the weapon, holding it parallel to the ground. Aiming the tip directly at the giant dog's fully opened maw, he thrust forward without hesitation. Combat art, impaling thrust. In Elden Ring, this move could bypass guarding. And in this world, these souls-like monsters didn't even have the intelligence for that kind of defense. With the brutal thrust of the great sword, as a second-tier weapon, its razor-sharp tip driven by Ron's strength pierced forward without the slightest delay. It went straight through the giant dog's skull. Yet the massive creature did not dissolve into black ash. Its terrifying vitality allowed it to resist, trying to prevent the great sword from being withdrawn. Its withered front claws, even as flesh was torn open by the blade, crimson blood dripping down with a putrid stench still clamped tightly onto great fortune embedded in its head. Stalling for time. Everything unfolded exactly as Ron had expected. The moment he launched his assault, several giant dogs that had been circling to the sides suddenly burst forward at incredible speed, charging at him. Improved, huh? A very familiar scenario. 3 wolves. Just swapped out for tougher, stronger giant dogs. Feeling danger for the first time in a while, Ron relied purely on instinct to react. He decisively released the great sword. Facing the multi-directional assault, the shinobi prosthetic mounted on his left arm fired a grappling hook toward the ceiling. The hook embedded firmly into the rock, shattering fragments of stone. Pulled by the rope's tension, he leapt upward, nimbly evading the encirclement. The gravel stone seal that had been hanging from his wrist was now firmly gripped in his palm. As magic flowed through him, Lanciax's glaive. Crackling crimson lightning erupted, radiating a violent, tyrannical aura that bathed the dim tunnel in red light. No chanting required. Almost instantly a blade of red lightning formed in Ron's hand. The same move. Won't work a second time. After charging forward with their massive bodies, the giant dogs realized they had lost their target, but it was already too late to adjust direction. Their bodies collided mid-charge. And as Ron cut the rope, he gripped Lanciax's glaive and swept downward from midair toward the clustered monsters below. A dazzling explosion of crimson lightning erupted. Violent magic spread across the ground, a wave of red lightning detonating outward. The explosive force instantly tore the monsters apart. Soul shards +5, now that's what I'm talking about. The ability to switch between character save slots freely using the high-growth Tarnished and Ashen one to establish the combat baseline, then layering it with the high mobility of the Sekiro-style build, the result was absolutely greater than 1+1. Ron adjusted his posture and landed steadily. Looking ahead, the monsters that had been lurking in the darkness seemed to sense the danger. They were retreating. So what came next was simple. He picked up the great sword dropped by the dead monster. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and began hunting the giant dogs that had already started to falter. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 177, Chapter 177, A Talent Never Seen Before. 11:49 words. The battle broke out very suddenly. Having encountered a special monster, a never-before-seen hellhound, Ron, and the members of his familia, had already launched their attack on the giant dogs. It was hard to evaluate. At the very least. In a Loki Familia expedition, this kind of reckless behavior would definitely earn a scolding from Captain Finn. And as for herself, she was nothing. Just a supporter in the expedition. Tiona didn't offer any judgment. If she really had to say something, then it would be that Ron's battle against the monsters surrounding him was simply too pleasing to watch. He resolved the encirclement with remarkable finesse. In terms of technique, this guy absolutely surpassed the vast majority of adventurers in Ora Rio. Combat talent. It's honestly a bit outrageous. The dark-skinned girl crossed her arms over her chest, not stingy at all with her praise. If she hadn't witnessed this battle with her own eyes, she might have doubted whether this was even the same person who had once fought desperately against the ancient dragon Lanciax. This goes beyond just outrageous, doesn't it? As the older sister, Tioni's personality was completely different from her carefree, thoughtless younger sister. This encounter battle had indeed been excellent. The strength he displayed was absolutely comparable to a level 4 adventurer. But what she cared about more was the immense amount of information hidden behind it. The appearance of these special monsters was all because of Ron. Only now did Tioni finally understand why their captain held such goodwill toward him. These unprecedentedly powerful monsters could allow the core members of the Loki Familia to improve their ability values through battle. And not only that, if they ventured deeper, those mutated floor bosses could bring about great feats, perhaps even enabling high-level adventurers to ascend further. A genius. That's probably just the entry requirement to chase after him. Why was Ron's strength improving so quickly? Most likely because his already exceptional talent was being deliberately targeted by the dungeon. Within such difficulty, he was gaining the growth he deserved. Thinking this far, Tioni couldn't help but click her tongue. If not for this chance encounter, then at most in just half a year, this guy would completely surpass her. Tarnished. Such a strange title, but it feels like there's a reasonable explanation behind it. Compared to Ron, even Lafia seems to pale in comparison. Was it really okay to say that to her face? Still not used to this fight-on-sight style, by the time Lafia had prepared herself and wanted to cast magic to assist, Ron was already locked in combat with the monsters. To avoid friendly fire, the elf girl had no choice but to watch from the sidelines. If she wanted to integrate into this kind of combat, she would probably need to take the path of a magic swordsman. Hearing the discussion between the two senior members, Lafia didn't feel discouraged at all. Only by truly recognizing the gap could she gain enough motivation to catch up. What she was more curious about was the magic Ron used while facing multiple giant dogs at once. A red, leaping arc of lightning. In the end, it gathered into a blade that was almost tangible. Whether in range or explosive power, it had already surpassed the magic she could wield. Most importantly, the crimson lightning that spread out alongside the blade's strike gave her a sense of familiarity. Carefully recalling, during their second encounter in the dungeon, that never-before-seen ancient dragon. The magic used by that floor boss, didn't it feel like it came from the same source as Ron's technique just now? Unable to confirm her guess, Lafia asked, "Senior Tioni, did you notice the magic Ron used? Feels familiar." The topic was brought up again. It was precisely the issue Tiona and Tioni had instinctively ignored. They exchanged glances, but after hearing Lafia's judgment dash, "It's very similar to the magic used by that draconic monster we encountered on the 12th floor. Both are constructed from red lightning." The two Amazon sisters from Talskura rarely showed such serious expressions. As first-tier adventurers, they were extremely familiar with it. Through innate talent or magic books, each adventurer could possess at most 3 types of magic. Of course, the form of magic could be shaped into different attack methods. That was precisely how Riveria had earned the title of Nine Hell. How could Ron's situation be explained? In all their years as adventurers, they had never seen a precedent where someone could learn magic from monsters or floor bosses. Could it be that the special skill Ron possessed could even imitate the magic used by monsters? This kind of ability, one that shattered common sense, left Tioni at a loss for words. Watching the monsters ahead being rapidly cleared out by Ron, perhaps the answer she sought would reveal itself during the expedition to come. She shook her head lightly. "Don't think about it for now. No matter whether it's from the perspective of the Loki Familia or, as Ron's friends, anything that happens during this expedition must never be mentioned to outsiders." If things were truly as she suspected, if Ron's special skill could imitate monster techniques, just how much of a sensation would that cause in Orario? A monster Not in the derogatory sense but in the sense that his talent had, in some way, already surpassed the great heroes of antiquity. This is getting interesting. Tioni clicked her tongue. I just wonder how lively the future of Orario will become because of Ron's appearance. Were the giant dogs really that strong? In a Souls-like context, they were just newbie killers. With proper equipment and skilled use of combat arts, these monsters weren't much of a threat at all. Their charge was troublesome, and the flames they spat out could be deadly. A moment's carelessness, and an ordinary adventurer would be finished. It's over. Ron cleanly used Lion's Claw to sever the giant dog's head. Watching the monster turn to dust and scatter, he didn't feel much pressure. Of course, it could also be said that he had long grown accustomed to the torment of these hellish monsters. Looking ahead into the dark cave passage, he could still sense the dense malice of the Souls-like dungeon. At least the dungeon hadn't given up, it was still spawning special monsters for him to farm. Ron then looked back at his teammates not far behind. Having already demonstrated things firsthand in the previous battle, his tone remained flat as he calmly stated, This is probably the kind of monsters we'll be facing next. If there's nothing else, then let's continue forward and keep exploring. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 178, Chapter 178, Monster Extermination. 1,186 words. This was the threat they would have to face in the upcoming Familia expedition: various unreasonable, unprecedented groups of special monsters. Lafia didn't have any objections. After all, the goal of exploration was to improve one's ability values and gain all-around experience. And as for why Ron's strength had grown so quickly, and the reason behind the Loki Familia's expedition at this point, all of that had already been answered. Should be no problem. Facing his calm gaze, the elven girl seemed somewhat lacking in confidence. These giant dog-type monsters were, to some extent, quite troublesome. Could she defeat them? Lafia herself wasn't sure, but she knew one thing clearly: no matter what, she couldn't become a burden during this dungeon expedition. Don't push yourself too hard either. These monsters are pretty tough. When they're on the verge of death, they might expose an opening and then strike back desperately. For example, delayed attacks. Since it was a specific gaming term, Ron could only explain it in a straightforward way. That's just how Souls-like systems are. Desperate counterattacks with delayed timings, monsters hiding in dark corners to fire sneak shots, or enemies with special mechanics that are hard to deal with. As for a boss's second phase, he hadn't actually encountered one yet. But he knew that as he went deeper, it would absolutely be an unavoidable death trap. All in all, Ron concluded with a smile, just stay cautious. An adventurer's first priority is staying alive, only after that comes being an adventurer. It was a rough, simple truth. But when it reached the ears of the expedition team, especially the Hiriot sisters, who had truly come into contact with Ron, they clearly realized, all of this was experience earned by Ron himself. And the process of gaining that experience was probably even bloodier than they could imagine. As for this expedition, their task was simple: to ensure the team's safety as much as possible. The most obvious change was in their attitude. The earlier slackness was gone. Having witnessed these troublesome monsters firsthand, even their expressions gradually turned serious. One misstep, and they could run into real danger here. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving. After all, this was a mixed team composed of two familias. Getting this kind of response was already enough for Ron. As for so-called tactical coordination, it wasn't actually the most important thing. When facing monsters, as long as they could stay calm, fight properly, and share some of the pressure, that was enough. In the exploration that followed, they didn't pursue speed. Instead, they began clearing out the area on the 13th floor, gradually adapting to the strength of the giant dogs. With his character save slot combinations, Ron handled things more and more smoothly, actively taking on the pressure of the special monsters. Of course, that didn't mean the rest of the team were just dead weight. Mikoto, who had already reached level 3, could rely on the techniques taught by Takamikazuchi to effectively kill giant dogs even when fighting alone. On the other hand, those lacking experience Daphne and Lafia fought more like traditional adventurers, melee coordination and kiting up front, with the mage providing damage from the back line. At least for now, the situation could be described as steadily improving. When Ron cleanly swung his greatsword, combining it with an ash of war to sever the head of the last giant dog, the malice lingering on this floor vanished in an instant. Extermination mechanism. Inside the dim dungeon passageways, the concept of time gradually became blurred. There was only battle. Endless battle, constant encounters with monsters until those mutated creatures reverted back to their original hellhound forms. Only then did Ron finally stop. The overall intensity of the fights had been extremely high, one could even say exhilarating. Based on his past exploration experience, when teaming up with Mikoto, it would take at least 2 days to completely exterminate the monsters on a floor. But as the team grew larger, the most direct improvement was efficiency. Standing still, he adjusted his breathing. But the fatigue from continuous combat couldn't be shaken off in the short term. His gaze swept across everyone present. Especially Lafia. From the eyes of this golden-haired elf, Ron could clearly see exhaustion, let alone the weaker members of his own familia. At this pace, 10 days would definitely be enough to reach the expedition's final destination. Let's find a place to rest first. Going deeper right now isn't suitable. More importantly, there won't be any safe places to settle in the next floors. After all, they couldn't exactly set up camp in an area still crawling with monsters and filled with that souls-like malice. When they heard Ron's arrangement, Daphne finally let out a long sigh of relief. Facing monsters stronger than herself, as a level 2 adventurer, she was the one struggling the most. Even though it was still combat, today's exploration was on a completely different level compared to before. That works. If we keep going, I'm seriously gonna drop dead. She didn't even care about propriety anymore. Daphne just wanted to find a quiet place to rest. And as they searched for a suitable campsite, the difference became obvious. That was the mutated giant dog packs had seemingly vanished entirely. The monsters they encountered afterward were all ones recorded by the guild. Hellhounds. They were still monsters. But compared to the troublesome giant dogs earlier, even their appearance now seemed almost neat and gentle by comparison. They posed no real threat to the expedition team. In a relatively open area, as they set up a temporary camp, before Ron could properly rest, someone came looking for him. Her appearance was somewhat unfamiliar. But he recognized her identity. Lafia's roommate. Because she was a supporter and didn't directly participate in combat, her presence had always been relatively faint. As for her earlier attitude, Ron didn't care about it at all. He wasn't Valis, there was no reason for everyone to like him. As long as everyone did their part, that was enough. In a calm tone, he asked directly, "What do you need from me?" Of course, she did have something. It was just a bit hard for her to say. Before truly meeting Ron or experiencing the dungeon expedition, when she first heard about the so-called objective, especially that even level 2 adventurers could reach it, to be honest, Elfie had thought that this rookie adventurer captain, who had drawn so much attention in Rio and even cost her vacation, was a bit all show and no substance. But after actually seeing it for herself, and witnessing the nature of those mutated monsters, the girl felt nothing but shame for her earlier, rash judgment. If you're wrong, you fix it. If you misunderstand someone, you apologize openly. That was the principle Elfie upheld. Facing Ron's gaze, after hesitating for a moment, she sat down on the ground, hugging her knees. Her tone was clearly much softer now. "I came to apologize to you, Senior Ron. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 179, Chapter 179, The Hesitant Creature. 1165 words. An apology was understandable. What Ron didn't quite understand was why Elfie had suddenly spoken so loudly, to the point that it drew everyone's attention. Especially Tiona's curious gaze. He casually waved it off, "It's fine." After all, even if something like this were told to others, no one would believe it. Your reaction was within my expectations. That was the truth. Who would have thought that as a level 3 adventurer, whose exploration progress had barely reached the 12th floor, not to mention ordinary adventurers, even the guild hadn't expected it. And then the Hestia Familia received an expedition request. On the surface it seemed like goodwill assistance, only requiring them to reach the 24th floor, but the actual difficulty only Ron knew. When it comes down to it. For this expedition, I'm truly grateful for everyone's help. After all, you've just finished your own expedition and immediately have to continue exploring without rest. A deal was a deal. But this was something Ron genuinely wanted to say to the Loki Familia adventurers present. Perhaps the reason for their assistance was his own uniqueness. But the gratitude that should be expressed absolutely couldn't be omitted. Who could accept being dragged into overtime right after a rare holiday, especially without any extra pay? Ron glanced around at everyone, smiling lightly. If it were me, right after finishing an expedition without getting any rest, being told to keep exploring the dungeon, I'd definitely have complaints. How could he even guess what they were thinking inside? Hearing this, Elfie unconsciously tightened her arms around her knees. But when she met Ron's straightforward gaze, her eyes couldn't help but drift away. At the beginning she had indeed thought that way. But after experiencing the dungeon's unusual nature, that trace of resentment in her heart had long been washed away by the waves of monsters. Even though this information was strictly forbidden from being spread, this entirely new exploration experience had undoubtedly broadened her horizons. I'm sorry. She hadn't expected Ron to be so easy to talk to. The girl was originally lively by nature, and even her initial awkwardness gradually faded. She lifted her head, her tone firm. I'll definitely fulfill my duties as a supporter. When it comes to combat, I might not be able to help much, but I promise, I absolutely won't hold you back. Then I'll be counting on you. Ron nodded with a smile. In truth, he hadn't expected much help from her anyway. As a supporter, Elfie was more like a small add-on in this first collaboration. But a good team atmosphere, that was exactly what he wanted to see. Isn't that something I should be saying? Elfie couldn't help but mutter. Especially under the teasing gazes of her companions, she felt her cheeks heating up. At the same time, she was also puzzled by the changes in the monsters. She voiced the question on everyone's mind, I'm actually quite curious. Why is it that the hellhounds we encountered later were all normal monsters, completely different from the ones earlier? The difference is really big. Monsters are born because of the dungeon. You can think of it as the dungeon trying to stop me from going deeper, creating these special monsters as obstacles. When all the obstacles you've set fail to stop the enemy from advancing, would you keep endlessly placing more? After getting her answer, the girl quickly shook her head. But the mysterious aura surrounding Ron only grew stronger in her eyes. Why did it feel like he seemed to understand everything? Before Elfie could ask further, Makoto, having finished cooking a simple meal, stood up and looked toward Ron. Captain Ron, lunch is ready. Well then, since it's come to this, let's eat first. It felt like Makoto had stolen his line. But looking at the pot of simmering stew, something like sukiyaki, and the fairly decent-looking bento portions, Makoto's already excellent cooking talent had finally found its place during the dungeon expedition. Ron had no objections. Rest could only relieve physical fatigue, but energy expenditure could only be replenished through food. He smiled and said, after we finish eating, we'll do a quick adjustment. Then we head to the 14th floor and push our progress there. Everything before had just been appetizers. The real threats would likely begin from the 15th floor, the dark-skinned minotaur, various newly appearing monsters, and the 17th floor, the fire giant from Cassandra's prophetic dream. I'm really looking forward to it. Lafia murmured softly. Seeing her roommate Elfie getting along so well with Ron, she felt quite comforted. But even more than that, she felt envy. If she had that kind of personality, would she also be able to become close friends with Ron, the kind who could talk about anything? Though their time together had been short, deep within the elf girl's heart, Ron's figure had already left a bold, indelible mark. A bond that could never be erased. I just hope, after this expedition ends, I won't be left too far behind by Mr. At the same time relying on her identity as a creature, Phyllis quickly reached the middle floors, and found the Evolus members gathered there. According to the god Dionysus, even if it meant sacrificing these Evolus members, she had to gain Ron's trust. This thought left her deeply conflicted. Did she really have to do this? Perhaps if she were a complete creature, without the ability to think as she did now, she wouldn't feel any burden in acting. What you need to do is find Ron. Surely, after this period of time, you're already very familiar with information about this adventurer. Once you locate the floor he's on, report to me immediately. Do not take any other actions. Lord Dionysus has made it clear under no circumstances are you to harm him. Because Ron is the key to executing the madness plan. After issuing the orders, Phyllis made no further moves. Her task was simple: to extend help at the moment Ron encountered danger. That was probably what it was called. Through this method she would gain his trust. But was what she was doing really right? This kind of behavior was no different from how the corrupted spirit implanted a magic stone into her body, allowing her who should have died to continue living as a creature. Completely taking away what should have been Ron's life. Looking at the safe floor before her, the black-haired elf girl fell into brief contemplation. But the moment such thoughts arose, she couldn't help but recall the god's promise to live in Rio in a way that is acknowledged. Years of indoctrination had long since left subtle, ingrained marks deep within her heart. She decisively crushed those uncertain thoughts. Looking toward Rivera — based on normal exploration speed, should be arriving at the safe floor soon, right? I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/Tito Viller. Chapter 180, Chapter 180, Advancing Deeper. 1191 words. Food was absolutely the best way to relieve fatigue. Especially while drinking hot soup. The most immediate feeling was that his stamina was rapidly recovering. After resolving the lunch issue, they didn't rush to head to floor 14 for exploration. Instead, they chose to rest in place. Ron himself had no problem. But what about his teammates? You all take a short break. At this floor, we probably won't run into mutated monsters. I'll head to floor 14 first to scout ahead. He quickly made his decision. Facing the curious gazes of the girls present, Ron smiled and explained, "This will speed up our overall efficiency. After all, the expedition target is only the end of the mid-level floors. If we take too long, it'll easily make the guild suspicious." That was indeed reasonable. At least Tioni, who was relatively calm and rational, felt a surge of surprise when she heard Ron's cautious judgment. How should she put it? Probably that his steady and cautious way of doing things wasn't much different from their own familia captain. Perhaps the fact that Ron's special talent hadn't been exposed to Aurario's wider view had a lot to do with this cautiousness. If the guild were to find out what kind of consequences it would bring, she couldn't see that far yet, but she knew one thing clearly: Ron's life afterward would definitely not be peaceful. Familia's scrambling to cooperate with him. They might even resort to certain coercive methods. At the very least, if the Freya Familia learned of it, they would absolutely take further action. As for danger? Even though Evolus had been wiped out on the surface, within the vast labyrinth city of Rio, their remnants were still active in the shadows. A special talent capable of boosting an adventurer's strength would absolutely become a thorn in the eyes of those remnants. If I didn't see how young you look, it'd be hard to imagine you're this composed. Tioni didn't hesitate to praise Ron. No one disliked smart people. What's more, this was probably one of the few chances she had to evaluate him as a senior. Once this expedition ended, Ron would definitely ascend directly to level 4. For safety reasons, the Amazon girl looked at her younger sister Tiona and decisively said, "Tiona, you accompany Ron to floor 14. Do your best to ensure his safety." Even just in the mid-level floors, the monsters Ron encountered were already at this level. If he went to the lower floors, how much help would his uniqueness bring to the Familia? Tiona was looking forward to it. "No problem. I can join the fight too, right?" These never-before-seen monsters already look really interesting just from appearance. With a completely different personality, recalling the strength of those giant dogs, Tiona was already itching to try. And since Ron had chosen to head deeper alone to scout, that also meant the chances of encountering danger would increase. She could use safety as a reason to step in and test the strength of those special monsters. "I want to go too." Even though her body was full of fatigue, Lafia didn't want to miss such an opportunity to train herself. Besides, if Ron went alone, she felt somewhat uneasy. In terms of close combat, she might indeed not match Ron. But the key point, she was a mage. Ignoring combat endurance and focusing purely on the destructive power of magic, releasing attacks comparable to level 5, something Lafia felt was easily within her reach. "Let's arrange it like this for now." Ron had no objections. No one would refuse one-on-one time with beautiful girls, even if there was Tiona acting like a third wheel. Meanwhile, looking at his own Familia members, it was obvious they were exhausted. After all, 2 of them were level 2, and even Mikoto, who was stronger, had only just reached level 3. Forcing a deeper advance would instead create danger. After deciding to explore deeper floors, Ron took the lead, stepping forward toward the passage not far ahead that connected to deeper levels. Only high-intensity combat could bring greater growth in strength. With no safety concerns, he naturally intended to maximize the support of the Loki Familia. "It's here." Compared to the upper floors of the dungeon, the cave environment of the mid-level floors was clearly more spacious. The lighting still came from the dungeon's faint ambient glow, making visibility gradually dim. Looking ahead at this nearly pitch-black staircase leading to deeper floors, that feeling of malice from the dungeon, which had only recently faded, surged back into his mind once again, stronger than when he first stepped onto the brink of death. For adventurers, the first priority was to find a way to survive. Under normal circumstances, if he felt this kind of viscous, tide-like malice that simply couldn't be shaken off, Ron would absolutely stop exploring. He knew something bad was definitely waiting ahead. "What's wrong?" Noticing Ron's steps halt at the entrance of the staircase, Tiona cast him a curious look. Especially when she saw the gradually serious expression on his face. Even if she didn't want to think too much, she realized something was off. "Do you have concerns about going deeper?" "Not exactly. It's just, I've never felt such intense malice before." Ron shook his head lightly. This malice was even comparable to that of an ancient dragon. What bad intentions could the dungeon have? If he had to say, it was probably trying, without holding anything back, to completely kill him within the dungeon. "Don't worry. I've got safety covered. Don't underestimate me, I'm a level 5 adventurer after all. Exploring the mid-level floors is absolutely more than manageable." Though when she said the latter part, the Amazon girl's confidence was clearly a bit lacking. That was, of course, assuming they didn't encounter something like the mutated floor boss Lanciax. Even at the same level, or even if she were slightly stronger, soloing a floor boss was still an extremely difficult challenge for an adventurer. "Then let's give it a try." Ron could sense the confidence in Tiona's tone. Moreover, the floor was right in front of them. No matter what, he had to continue deeper, whether for the expedition or for the future he sought. Ron knew there was no such thing as retreat. His gaze swept over the 2 girls behind him. "If things don't go smoothly, we'll retreat back to floor 13 and reconsider our strategy." "I can't wait anymore." She really couldn't wait to fight those mutated monsters. As for the malice Ron sensed, it was probably due to the special nature of his talent. Some kind of warning effect. Tiona couldn't figure it out. She didn't stay at the rear of the team. Instead, she took the lead, stepping into the staircase passage and advancing deeper into the dungeon. It was just, for some reason, this girl from the country of blood and fighting felt that this staircase seemed far longer than any path she had encountered in her past explorations. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller, Chapter 181, Chapter 181, Rolling Stone Trap 1090 words. This was definitely not an illusion. The stairway passage connecting to the deeper floors based on Tiona's past exploration experience was absolutely never this long. What exactly was going on? She could only turn her gaze back, looking toward the handsome young man following behind her. Ron's daily exploration was always like this. He probably knew the answer. Ron, have you noticed something off about this cave passage? It's way too long. Without the dungeon wall luminescence, the stairway passage had become extremely dim. After hearing Tiona's question, Ron frowned, walked up beside her, and began steadily channeling the magic within his body. Finally, it gathered in the palm of his right hand. Shattering crystal. Clusters of crystal devoid of any warmth continuously formed in Ron's palm. It wasn't because there were dangerous monsters ahead, it was simply to use the azure crystals to light the path forward. Under the clean radiance, like moonlight, they could see at a glance. The passage leading to the 14th floor twisted endlessly, vanishing into the depths. Was this normal? Back when he had just become an adventurer, Ron had encountered something like this before. Only back then, it had skipped several floors and sent him directly to the 6th floor, dropping those mimic war shadows right in front of him. But as his strength had grown, Ron simply couldn't believe that the dungeon hadn't noticed and would still use such a dumb method to produce ordinary monsters. A sudden toothache crept in as he looked at the carefree Tiona. He sucked in a breath and said, "Probably. Seems like we might have run into a bit of trouble." At the end of this stairway, what exactly was waiting for them? Could it be the fire giant from Cassandra's dream? The sun-browned girl frowned. What kind of trouble? There might be a very powerful monster waiting for us at the exit of the stairs. That's simple. If we can handle it, we fight. If we can't, we just run back up the stairs to the 13th floor and regroup with my sister. Tiona spoke as if it were obvious. But just as her words fell, rumble. From behind them, along the slanted stairway stretching downward, came the sound of something massive rolling toward them. The ground trembled continuously. Even the previously stable rock walls began shaking loose dust and fragments. With the rolling mass, the air surged violently. Ron's loose clothing whipped loudly in the wind. Looks like the dungeon isn't giving us a safe way to retreat. Using the illumination from the shattering crystal, he decisively turned back and saw it, a gigantic boulder, nearly filling the entire stairway, leaving no space to dodge, was barreling toward them. A very familiar feeling. At their current speed, they could definitely make it. But compared to being deliberately forced deeper into the dungeon, Ron would rather try smashing the incoming boulder with magic. Gritting his teeth, he decisively increased the charge of the shattering crystal. The crystal cluster, originally only thumb-thick, rapidly expanded, becoming dazzling like a brilliant gem under the blue light. With a lift of Ron's hand, the condensed crystals shot forward toward the oncoming boulder. Instead of dispersing into fibers, they remained as solid crystalline spikes, attempting to shatter it. The magic exploded brilliantly upon impact, yet even this assault failed to break the boulder. Because the crystalline spikes merely embedded into its surface. As it continued rolling, they were like nails hammered into it. The massive sphere showed no signs of damage whatsoever. If this were an upper floor with narrow tunnels, Ron might have tried smashing it with his greatsword. But in this wide, nearly single-lane passage with a boulder accelerating non-stop, this was no different from throwing yourself in front of a truck-level monster truck. Even if you somehow blocked it, who knew if the dungeon wouldn't follow up with something worse? Rely on Lafia's magic. By the time she finished chanting, they'd probably already be scattered in pieces. So he made a snap decision: run toward the end of the passage. We can't break this thing. After hearing Ron and witnessing his magic fail, Tiona completely abandoned the idea of confronting the rolling trap head-on. As a level 5 adventurer, the speed of the boulder wasn't particularly fast in her eyes. But before she had gone far, she suddenly realized the key issue: Lafia wasn't fast. Crap, I forgot. She had promised the captain no matter what, she would protect Lafia's safety. Running instinctively like this would put her in danger. Tiona slammed on the brakes. But just as she turned to go back, she saw Ron running toward her with the girl she had unconsciously overlooked. At that moment, Lafia was slung over Ron's shoulder. What are you standing there for? After all, she was his friend. Ron had never expected Lafia, a magic artillery type, to match him. Physically carrying her while running was just natural. As for the posture, at a time like this, appearances didn't matter anymore. But when he noticed Tiona had suddenly stopped ahead, his serious expression nearly broke. Who the hell slams the brakes on a one-way path like this? No time to think. There was no time. As Ron brushed past the sunbrown girl, his free left hand wrapped around her slender waist, locking her tightly with his arm and hoisted her onto his other shoulder. Compared to Lafia, Tiona wasn't slender. Years of training in the dungeon had given her a clearly defined muscular physique. But in this life-or-death moment, under the surge of adrenaline, Ron felt nothing of their weight. His only thought was forward. Until they reached the end of the stairway. Having never had such close contact with the opposite sex before, Tiona turned her head in a daze, looking at the equally stunned elf girl. A completely unfamiliar feeling filled her chest. I get carried too. But looking at the boulder accelerating down the slope, calm quickly returned to Tiona's mind. She decisively said, Lafia, use magic to break that boulder behind us. Even if you can't destroy it, you have to reduce its rolling momentum, or we'll definitely get crushed into paste. That was indeed the most appropriate solution. But feeling that strong hand gripping her backside, the golden yellow-haired elf felt her cheeks burning hot. And of course, her heart was pounding wildly. Lafia's voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz as she stammered, I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.